Welcome to Black Health Matters. I'm Darryl Armistead, your host. This episode is a Zoom recording of Howard University group session led by Dr. Clive Callender.
For health. But there's an article in the Washington Post that talks about that how cold weather, though, which is different from what Darryl is talking about, because the data supports what Darryl's talking about. But the data also supports the fact that when it gets real cold, you have a marked increase in heart attacks. So it's interesting that while cold immersion is great for you, being real cold isn't. And so it's interesting. So those of us who like warm weather can understand why those people who live in Minnesota in the Midwest have more heart attacks than people who live in warm countries. But anyways, I thought it was interesting. The other thing that was interesting is while we're talking about dairy products and lactose intolerance, one of the things about cheese is the fact that cheese, which is a dairy product and is related to milk, is not associated with lactose intolerance because most of the lactose is eliminated in the production of cheese. What are your thoughts about that, Darryl?
Yeah, that's true. People that are lactose intolerant can tolerate cheese a lot more than other dairy products. But cheese has high fat content. And so Dr. Ivy would probably tell you that from a heart health standpoint, to stay away from cheese.
Well, actually, the data, the most recent data indicate that it does not have a negative effect upon heart attacks, heart disease, or hypertension. And it's thought because it is not produce the LDL, as much LDL as you would expect. So there's a little discussion about whether or not, as a matter of fact, the studies suggested that people who ate cheese actually had a lower rate of hypertension and heart disease than others. But that, as you know, the studies vary. But anyway, but it's not as unhealthy as milk. That's the bottom line. Yeah. So. Okay, we got a lot of interesting articles that I'm going to share with you today. So, Dr. Buchanan, you can start. Of late, we haven't had many submissions from others. I used to submit some, and so you can start sending us articles as well, things that you find of interest that you think we should discuss. Now, this was an interesting item that I thought we should include, especially since we have children and grandchildren. And the question is, how many of you are going to let your kids play football? And I thought the fact that the injuries in football games, as we witnessed with this gentleman whose heart stopped beating after he tackled somebody. But of course, that's just one of the more lethal injuries. But they have at least 2 or 3 injuries every football game, and it's interesting. In this article that John submitted, points out the problems associated with football, not to speak of the brain disorders that we know about that lead to late deaths. The damages, looking at some of the quarterbacks get damaged in many ways. And it was amazing how they used to fight against the facts that football was the cause of brain damage and was killing people. and still is. And so as you advise your children and grandchildren as they go into different sports, boxing, of course, is a sport as well. And of course, they don't include that among most of the sports, but I think football and boxing and those things like it. I'm also concerned somewhat about the wrestlers. They have a high instance of relatively young deaths as well, and they don't include that in that. But are any of you wrestling fans? No. Okay. Well, anyway, many of your grandkids and kids going into football, still going to football?
Yeah.
Went into football, but my grandson plays basketball and loves basketball. He has a ball in his hand every day, going to the basketball court. And he's in college at Towson University playing basketball. He had a concussion. And he went to the doctors there, but he noticed it wasn't getting any better. Then he told his parents dizziness and other things that were going on. And luckily, Towson isn't that far. And his mom and dad had to pick him up, and he had been seeing a concussion specialist. And the after effects for him was vision. It affected his eyesight. And then he was afraid to even look at a basketball. And of course, through visits with the doctor, and he had to go through counseling and different eye or vision exercises. He's doing better. He picks up a ball again. I think the sight is better, but not quite where it was. And you just don't think of those things when your kids are out playing any kind of sport. Of course, with football, you think of that as being contact. But with basketball, I guess it can happen almost with anything.
Yeah,
Yes.
and this is interesting statistics that John put up that point out that NFL is far above everybody else. And NBA is pretty low. And so I hadn't really encountered anybody who had a concussion before you told me about
Right.
CJ.
CJ. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, so I was surprised to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
Those elbows though can be tough. Yeah.
Yeah.
I went to a fight, Doc, and a hockey game broke out.
What? Well, I mean, hockey is all. That's the only thing I don't. It's like if you don't have a fight in hockey, something's wrong.
Mm.
I mean, they just fighting all the time. I was surprised. Go back up to the data to look at hockey. I was surprised hockey wasn't much higher, but actually it's the highest of the ones who aren't football players. Football is just completely out of the ballpark. I mean, but it's amazing to me that hockey doesn't have more, because they fight all the time, hit each other with everything, with the stick and everything else. So, but I'm surprised about the concussion that CJ encountered. That was pretty serious too.
It was, yeah. He had to have weekly visits from school to Inova Fairfax, where the concussion specialist was, but it did help.
Yeah.
Do schools and universities, NFL, do they have the players, do they have to sign a waiver if they incur a concussion or any type of injury?
When you say waiver, what do you mean?
Waiver saying that the university or the league will not be held but so much responsible for the medical attention, or if one of the players do have a concussion.
I don't know. That's a good question. because it's so common. You would think that that may be the case, but I don't know the answer. Anybody else know? I didn't see that in this, but I don't know that's the case. Whether you sign a waiver or not, I think they should be held accountable. And of course, they have insurance policies, but I think that it's so common that you might think that it might be included, but and then they have such extraordinarily high salaries. But I don't know the answer to that question. It's a good question.
According to the internet, NFL is planning to institute some concussion waivers, but that's just a plan at this point. Has to be approved by the players' union, and of course, the goal is to limit lawsuits against the NFL.
Yeah, it seems like it's so attached to football. The Players Association would not go along with it, but it's going to be interesting to see what they come up with.
Thanks, Darryl, for looking that up.
You're welcome.
Okay, but any of you discourage your kids and grandkids from playing football?
I tried to no avail, because rule, and that's where money for college and all of that comes in more. And it's just mankind. What's the difference between the Middle Ages where men fought to death and the sports, gladiator, and they turn the lions on the people. People just like watching brutality, death, fights are, that's just what gives them their joy of watching everybody sock it out, kill each other and stuff. They say they don't. Now we're making up rules. But when you're fighting, protect yourself, like even in boxing, rather than just stop the sport at all. The sports that don't have that much injury, that doesn't bring in that much money. So it's our human nature to like to see bloodshed, death, and the brutality of it all. We say those are, I don't know.
Well, there's human nature, and then there's culture. We're in a violent culture, and most human cultures tend to be violent. But we don't have to. When you get smarter, you can change the culture. It's really hard to prevent grandkids. You can talk, but it's up to their parents to keep them from playing football.
Sounds like it'd be hard to do once because there's so much pressure outside of the house. But if you start early, you could keep them. Of course, you look at baseball. There's problems there too, but their salaries are among the highest. Baseball and football. Of course, that guy in soccer, I saw he got $75 million a year contract. So soccer is another sport that hitting with the head and feet and all that has its own issues.
Yeah, I think it's money driven. Kids look at that as a way to be a multi-millionaire, and they're willing to take the risk to get that money. It's all driven by, I don't know if it's avarice, but it seems
You don't know whether it's avarice?
it seems that way.
There's no amount of money in the world that can make it worthwhile to have CTE, severe symptoms, when you're in your 50s and you have excruciating headaches, paranoia, and then you die soon.
Right. Yeah.
It's not worth it.
Yeah, especially those football players, seeing them die at such young ages, killing themselves and killing others because of CTE, as you mentioned. It's sad.
Well, you also hear about these kids out on the field in August, very high temperatures and passing out and dying on the football field without, physical contact, just, working out in the heat and the humidity, the high heat and high humidity. And, that's a lot of that's going on too. But again, I think it's driven by the desire to get money.
The love of money is the root of all evil, is what the good book says. Although I wonder if the love of power exceeds the love of money. But
I don't think it's a love of money altogether. You look in elementary school and a fight breaks out. There's a smile that comes across everybody's lips. You see it in high school. Somebody fight. Everybody is smiling, looking on, and then they talk about it for the next day or so, who whipped who. And if any of you have ever been in a fight with any other human being, there is a rush, a thrill of onlookers, and sometimes with even you, whether you won or you lost. That is human nature. So we make up games where you can fight legally, and when they get hurt, we say, oh, wow. But you still have that joy and sensation you did as a youngster when a fight broke out. If I had a classroom and someone started fighting, there's nobody saying, oh, that's horrible, you're going to get hurt. They're all up there smiling and saying, get them. It starts young.
Well, I can tell you that things change once you get rid of the culture. Like if you look at TV, main thing about TV and movies is violence, is fighting. You just become conditioned to think that it's cool, and you get excited by it. I stopped watching TV in 1999, and I go to an occasional movie, but I refuse to go to a movie with violence in it. Now my reaction is far different to violence than it was beforehand. Beforehand, yeah, I had that reaction. I'd smile. Now I don't. I don't like violence. I don't have a good reaction to it. Just need to change the culture.
Dr. Callender, we have a grandson who had a concussion in his early football career, but he kept playing, and now he got a football scholarship to a school called Lock Haven University. It's in Pennsylvania. And he just got there this year, played football, and he's loving it. And I talked to his parents about his concussion, because like everybody is saying, you can get a concussion, and then the results of that concussion can come up later on in life. So I don't know, Carol talked to him about football, and he's got the scholarship. So the parents said, well, if you got 3 colleges to go to and one of them gives you a scholarship, that's the one you're going to go to.
Yeah, well, okay, I just thought it's a topic worthwhile discussing, because it's with us whether we like it or not. This is an article about the biggest health and biology breakthroughs of 2022. And as you go down, you see a number of issues. Of course, I think the biggest might have been the COVID vaccines, with the fact that we lost 1 million American lives, but might have lost 10 million if we didn't have the vaccines. So the vaccines and the boosters were one of the most important discoveries of the year. Then I thought of Georgia Dunstan and the human evolution, the genetic advances, in which they were able to look at the genotypes, the DNA, and identify the human genomic patterns, which is for which the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine was awarded. And I think George Dunstan talked about human genome and soul genomics, as she talks about it, and the fact that the DNA is so important. And then the third one related to the fact that we're using pig organs for transplantation down the road, xenotransplantation, which holds a future for us, in that we'll get a situation where the pig organ will be used, but the interstices of the organs will have human tissue, so that their rejection process will be overcome down the road. We've started that process already, and the fact that that has is in the mix. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, xenotransplantation will be commonplace, which is transplantation between members of different species. Then, of course, this is an interesting observation, that they found the polio in the waste, and that has allowed to us to be aware of the fact that in sewage systems of New York State and the UK, that and the polio virus had returned, and that's an amazing situation, that our poop can give us information that we weren't aware of before. And then, of course, COVID also taught us that ventilating buildings and filtering the air we breathe is very important, as it reduces the risk of respiratory disease in general, and specifically as it related to COVID. And that's why the airline industry and the other industries have moved to improve indoor air quality. And then artificial intelligence, which we talk about a lot, also helped us unfold the 3D structures of 200 million proteins, which will help us in development of new drugs and also other items. So these are some of the major breakthroughs. Any comments or thoughts about any of those in terms of moving in the right direction or the wrong direction? Any comments?
Well, one comment is my son, after taking a Christmas break, he went back, started teaching again, and he noticed in his classroom that the air quality was not good. So he's going to talk to those responsible for the air quality of the building to have it checked for asbestos and maybe other things, because he noticed as soon as he got back to school. And sometimes you can just walk in a room and tell what the condition of the air is. You know, because you can't go in a room and start coughing and sneezing and stuff, you know, something's up.
Yeah, and it can be improved. So it just that you have to be willing to pay the money it costs, but it's critical. You're right.
Yeah,
Asbestos is another issue, a separate issue, but the ventilation is another one. Yes, Elizabeth.
yes, I totally agree. My father and my father-in-law had some results from asbestos. Oh, and Happy New Year to everyone that I've not said it to. The other thing is that with me, I was reared in a different climate, and I moved here over 20 plus years ago, and which is a different climate. But I noticed with me, I've always been an analytical person of my body. And I noticed that if I walk in a room, I can tell if there's mold in it, because my body will react to it. And so I love the school that I was working in. I love the kids. And so I just reached back to something a medical director told me years ago. I just kept a bottle of alcohol on my desk, which kept the air purified. So their air quality, and one of the principals that was hired, she mentioned that she was concerned about the air quality. And so I totally agree with that. That is so important.
And you know, they have air purifiers, which you can bring and put into your room. Even if the school isn't willing to do it, you can have an air purifier that you bring into your own room to purify the air. So that's food for thought in terms of your son as a teacher. If they aren't willing to do it, he can get air purifiers that aren't that costly for the room that he teaches. Now, the question is, will they permit it? But I think it's a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, you can always ask that the employer test the air quality, but if they don't, you can insist and have it enforced through OSHA because that's a workplace safety issue. So the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, that's the contact for workplace safety. You can make sure that the testing and monitoring happens.
Yeah, they often are resistant, and so you really have to push them on it. You're right.
I thought about that a lot at the high school where I taught at. Spingarn was built so long ago, and I think they had in mind it was going to be an air raid shelter because it was so sturdily constructed, steel reinforced concrete, and we installed some network cables throughout the building. So we had to drill through different floors to send the cables up to different floors, and we found some asbestos as we were
Really?
going through the floors. So I thought about that a lot. Anybody that was in that environment, all the students, for many years having to deal with that possibility of fibers, asbestos fibers in the air that they breathe.
Okay, let's move to the next one. There's very good points brought up. Oh, this is I thought of Darryl with this one. This is a program that Danae Simpson has been working with for about the last 5 or 6 years. And it talks about how she has worked on addressing many of the disparities that exist and how this all results in African Americans having more kidney disease. And so she made this presentation that talked about that food deserts in Chicago and that transportation as well as food deserts. And we got all these dialysis centers, but no grocery stores. And this is why she says that this is why we have more kidney disease and we have so many dialysis centers and so many food deserts. And so that this is something that she has devoted her career to, and she just, as a matter of fact, was given the Disparity Award by the American Transplant Society this year, as a matter of fact. And she's working diligently to try to get more people to recognize that the social determinants of health, as well as the political determinants of health, play a large role in terms of why we have so much kidney disease.
In Chicago, black neighborhoods, you don't have many grocery stores at all. The primary grocery store is a Jewel in Chicago. So you don't see those. You don't see Whole Foods. But they have a lot of convenience stores that are owned by East Asians, Koreans, Japanese. Very few convenience stores owned by black people.
So this is very timely. Okay.
That's not just in Chicago, that's everywhere.
So true. So true. It just happens that she is in Chicago and picked up on it, but your observation is correct. Now, this is a study that I thought of Carol and her perspective on empathy. And this is an interesting study that looked at about 300,000 people and identified in 57 countries.
Hmm.
No matter the age, that women were much more empathetic than men everywhere and at all ages. And it's an interesting observation that is not surprising. Of course, I'm not understanding exactly why women are more gifted in this way, but this is something that is a fact. And they just pointed it out. I don't think anybody's surprised to hear about it. It's just that it's no longer suspected. It's now known. And that, and of course, that suggests that some of the data that indicates that women may make more empathetic physicians may be as accurate as well. Any comments on this? No surprise to anybody, but they like to emphasize no country in the world was were men more empathetic than women.
Average scores, but every now and then you'll run into a highly empathetic man.
I like that comment. Thank you, Darryl.
Is that motherly instinct that women normally have?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's just the way we were designed.
Yes,
True.
yes. And a minister used to say all the time, he used to say, the responsibility of a man is to provide and protect. The responsibility of a lady is to nurture and care.
Wow.
Yes. Too bad Eve gave us that apple, huh?
You all
Where
got
was her instincts then?
I'm not going to touch that one.
you got to remember that Adam was made first and then Eve. And so when he made Eve, he had to make an improvement with the brain.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Hey, look out for that one. I don't know any studies that would support that one, so we can't. That's purely conjecture. We hasten to add, so you don't think that that's the fact. That's purely the Tatum conjecture.
That's good, John.
Y'all gonna get me kicked off YouTube.
Right. That's why I made the comment. There's no data that supports that one. Now, this is an article that alleges that medicine is not fair or sensitive to older people. And one of the areas in which we fail, allegedly, is in terms of human sexuality and the inability to ask seniors about their questions, if they ask at all, about their sex function. And we tend to eliminate that. Of course, that's just one of the issues in which being older has put the senior person in a disadvantage when they go to see the physician, because they're used to taking care of younger patients. And unless you have a doctor, just like we have Dr. Obisi-san, who I'm going to invite to talk to us pretty soon, unless you have physicians like him who are gerontologists, they aren't as sensitive to the issues of older people. And the sexual activity of older people sometimes is ignored. When, in point of fact, we know that older people are sexually active and they get sexual diseases because of their activity without being as protected as they were when they were younger. But it seems that this is an area that the medical profession has got to do a lot of work on. In addition to which, when you have older people go to the hospital and they aren't taken care of in a sensitive way, sensitive to the age differences, they also don't fare as well. And so this is a reason why some have alleged that that we don't treat our elders as well as we should relative to a number of health areas. And sexual activity is one of them. And so, does your doctor ever ask you about your sexual interests when you're over 60?
No,
Yeah, they probably don't. And that's an area that we need to work on. We need to be more, do better on.
As a woman, after you stop going to a gynecologist, you know, just having a primary physician, they don't ask, but when you
They
were
forget all
going-
about that.
Yeah, you know, when you had a special doctor when you were younger and had to, you know, have pap smears and this type of thing. But after that, no.
Well, we've got to do better. That's clear. But articles like this are read in a lot of places, so I'm not as optimistic that when Dr. Bisasan presents to us, I'm going to ask him about this issue as well.
I have a nurse practitioner, and she's very attuned to my care. And she was the first one that I didn't have to argue with, because I like to see a gynecologist once a year. And they keep telling me after menopause, I don't have to. And I
That's
told
good.
one doctor, I said, well, after menopause, you don't have to. That doesn't mean that I don't have to.
Right.
You may
Your
not
point-
want me to, but I want me to.
Your point is well taken, and as a matter of fact, my daughter mentioned that when she gave a presentation about the fact that after menopause, you still have sexual organs, and these organs have to be addressed, and they are the source of cancer and other diseases. So this is an issue that has been swept under the table and needs to be brought out again. Your point is very well taken.
No,
Dr.
I noticed that on the commercials on the radio, especially on the sports channels and now on the TV, for male sexual dysfunction. I mean, there's so many commercials now about it, so it's gotta be an issue. I mean,
But it's
because
very male sensitive. It's not female sensitive. It's as though only men have sex. They forgot completely about women, and that all of the sex are about the male dysfunction, nothing about female dysfunction, sexual dysfunction.
is there some such a thing as female dysfunction
Yes,
like it is with males?
yes, oh yes, yes. As a matter of fact, one of the group sessions that we had when we were having our group sessions was related to the sex issue, because the men, no offense, when they would talk about their sex issues, when women are present, they lie about it and talk about how great they are. And then when you have women issues, we did talk about sex, and we talked about the fact that female dysfunction, decrease in libido, as well as other sexual issues arose. So that it's well known, but it's just not addressed appropriately. And it's totally ignored on TV. All they talk about is the men. And they forget that, no, you can't forget it's a two-way thing. But the commercials act as though there's no such thing as female dysfunction.
Yes,
Dr. Callender, when I was working in insurance, I was a customer service rep on the telephone when Viagra came out. And when it came out, the phones were ringing off the hook. All these people wanted to know if it was covered under that plan, and the heads of these companies were coming to us saying they wanted the coverage for the men. And it was just by providence that the insurance company that I worked for, which was called Health Plus, had a female head. And she took all the meetings and everything. And she said, well, for one thing, we're not even going to think about giving it to companies that do not cover birth control for women. So if you want Viagra coverage, then you have to cover. And they were, oh, well, also, and they would say, oh, but that's, that's our religion. And she said, well, maybe it's religion that you don't have, that your penis doesn't work. Maybe that's part of it. So we were able to get 100% coverage for birth control from companies that never had it when Viagra came.
That's an interesting observation. Yeah.
One of the things that I've always believed in is preventive care. My mother always talked about it when we were kids, about preventive care. And one of the preventive care is, and it is about the insurance as well as Medicare, is after a certain age that you have your GYN exam between 1 and 2 years, and it is covered. And the last time I went, my GYN doctor says, well, your primary doctor can do that. And I said, yes. I said, yes, I do. I said, but as long as I have you, I will always come to you, because I want somebody that's a specialist.
Right. And the primary doctors often don't do it. And they should do it, but they don't always do it. And they don't, no offense, they don't always do it as well. So
I heard it's a rumor about female Viagra. Is that true?
Well, I've heard talk about, yes, that is true. But whether it works or not is another question. But yeah, there is a version of Viagra, but it's not as effective. Yeah, that came out a couple of years ago. Not as old as a Viagra, but it came out, but it wasn't viewed as successfully as Viagra.
Yeah, I heard about that too. I think it's shaped just like the Viagra pill, except for it's pink, while the Viagra pill is blue.
Well,
There's
Oh.
one thing that they say about women though, and it's just not recently, they call older women cougars. And but they never talk, they'll say that she's fine and everything until it doesn't matter what age. And younger men want older women, cougars. And I've seen a couple of movies and et cetera about, and then there's one reality program about these older women dating younger men and how the younger men like these older women because they're more experienced. But very seldom have I've heard it on this session, et cetera, about the dysfunctional on the sexual life of women, but I haven't heard it anywhere else, but except for this group session.
That's one of the problems, is that it's not even discussed. We discussed it in our group because it was an issue that was often forgotten. And so the libido of the female when they got renal disease was rarely discussed. And most of the discussion about sex was from the male perspective. But I was more sensitive to it because it was a problem for women. We did, and in the female group, we did talk about the presence or absence of interest in sex in the female, and also the fact that the woman was regarded as an instrument, and whether or not they had a sexual desire or not seemed to be irrelevant. And so that's why we covered it in our group.
Dr. Callender, I think I know a couple of places where it is definitely discussed. And one of those places is marriage counseling session. And the other place is when you go to your divorce lawyer.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
Okay. This is an interesting article that talks about something that we know very well, that getting enough sleep, 7 to 9 hours a night, exercising at least 30 minutes a day for at least 150 minutes a week, and having a BMI that's not obese, all contribute to living longer. And of course, this is data that they amassed, and they have identified that, in point of fact, that these are all helpful, and that a lot of people do feel that if you get to 80, it's all downhill, and many people don't get to be 80.
Yeah.
But to be 80 and have a quality of life and to be pain-free is thought to be abnormal. But actually, what these studies have shown is that successfully aging, as they call it successful aging, is something that you should seek. And they identify those factors that we've already mentioned that allow you to be happy even when you're 80 and above. And of course, Dr. Ivy, who's the oldest participant in this group, who's 91, isn't here today. But anyway, that's issues. And this is they talk about people born in Canada were 72% were successful ages, while the immigrants were less successful ages. And those people who had trouble sleeping were less successful ages. And those people who walked often were more successful agers. That's the term they use, agers. And so having a good sleeping patterns, good exercise patterns, and good nutritional patterns were important ways to have a quality of life when you're in the elderly status. And now, one of the things that was a little disturbing, go back up, I think it shows, it talks about, I think, I forgot where it is, but it points out that those people who had poverty were much less likely to age.
Mm.
And this, as was noted in that study, and the question was, why is the poverty not give you access to aging, as if we didn't already know, because it contributes. You don't have access to health care, you don't have access to good food, you don't have access to healthy lifestyle. And as a consequence, that was deemed a factor as well as the other factors, being below the poverty level. I just encountered a medical student, a family of 7 that had a financial income of less than $25,000, which of course way below the poverty level. And look at this difference. Above the poverty level, 74% was successful agers, 51% below the poverty. That's the largest difference of any other group, pointing out that we've got to work on equity, which we don't have in this country. To have universal health insurance is positive, is important. But one of the things that comes up in those countries that have access to health care, they have similar issues because they have long wait times before they can see a doctor, in Canada and other places. So It's a complex issue, but I think this data is frightening, but actually not surprising. Any comments or thoughts? You know, in this country where the mighty dollar plays a role, it's public policies have got Medicaid, which is very helpful, but it's the people who get in the middle. So if you're poor enough to get Medicaid and you don't have enough money to pay for good health insurance, then you get lost. Any other comments about this article? Okay, this is an article that in many ways, you know, when you read articles, you have to be conscious of who are they talking about. And in this study, they're talking about Brazilians. So all of the data related to Brazil, which is pretty much a meat-eating country. And in this country, they found that the highest incidence of depression was among vegetarians. And they looked at the reasons, and most of them seem to be social. But anyway, this is, and you can see that vegetarians in Brazil account for less than 0.5% of the population. So you can see why the data for this study would be skewed. And so that's why when you have an article or study, you have to look at the nature of the article and decide on whether it gives you important information. Any other comments about this article on depression and vegetarians?
You don't need a comment from Darryl about this.
Well, yeah.
This is Brazil. We don't need a comment from there.
Well, I think it's pretty.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the next one. Is that the last one? No.
Um,
Oh, yeah. How long older adults will live comes down to 17 often surprising factors.
Mm.
And while this is a complex article, and we won't talk about all 17 of these factors, they did a study to predict whether a person over the age of 70 is likely to live 2, 5, or 10 more years. And so they identified participants who were at least 71 years old. And they stored their blood, and they then studied the blood to identify what were the associated phenomenon associated with so-called longevity. And they were able to identify some interesting findings that they drew conclusions based upon the blood work. And they did identify 17 variables, but in this article, they talked about a few of them. For example, leading factors were physical function. And their physical function was defined as simple: ability to go grocery shopping or perform household chores. And they found that this was the leading factor associated with longevity. There are other factors which we'll talk about later, but this was the leading factor. Can you go to the grocery store? Can you still do house cleaning? And cancer and heart disease was not among the main predictors, which is surprising. But more important is, are you functional? And going shopping is an ordeal sometimes.
I can see from this why women live longer than men. Those are the things we do.
I remember last year when I was walking before I started back to swimming, when the swimming pools opened back up. One day, before I went walking, I went grocery shopping, and I checked my meter on my phone, and I had already walked almost a mile, just leaving home and going grocery. I always do.
Yeah, that's right. Boy, that's an ordeal, man. I go with my wife, man. It's amazing to me. She does it easily. Yeah, but for me, it's a chore. And now go back up a little bit, because the other factor that's associated with it is the HDL level. That's the good cholesterol, high density, which is protective. And so if you have a high HDL, then your likelihood of living longer is good. And that's the cholesterol that is the good cholesterol. And the fact is that this HDL gets rid of all those things that cause arteriosclerosis. And so as you look at your cholesterol level, the LDL is the bad cholesterol, the HDL is the good cholesterol.
Yeah. So for HDL, it's considered high if it's 60 milligrams or higher.
Right. And below 40 is low. Right. And many physicians will give you medications if your HDL is lower than 40. But there isn't a whole lot of data that supports the fact that that will increase HDL. Then, of course, smoking history was found to be correlate with not living long. And then this is another factor. Being a younger age was predictive of longevity, along with cognitive function. So if you were at 70 and you still had good cognitive function, that was a good predictor of longevity as well. It's amazing how those who started smoking early that's a major factor against longevity. Any comment? Now this is if you don't know what a plank is, this is the ability to sustain muscle position for at least 60 seconds. And this shows you, that's what is called a plank. You can see this lady holding that position. Any of you do planks?
I did.
Oh, you do, huh? Okay.
Is it part of yoga?
Are you a 60-second planker or what?
I think I'm a 5-second planker.
Well, you can start at 5 and go up. You can't go down.
It's really hard. It's like a stationary push-up.
Yeah. Except you stay there. Yeah.
Is that one of the exercises in yoga, John?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Isometric, yeah. Well, it's interesting that there have been many studies that demonstrate that this helps your spine. And of course, that keeps you from falling.
Say that again. What keeps you from falling?
The spine exercises.
Okay.
Well, your 5-second is beginning. You can get up to 20 seconds. And then eventually up to 60.
I'm going to try it now while we're talking about it. 5 seconds.
That's interesting how this is for preventing injury and actually keeping you from falling. And falling is one of the biggest obstacles we have as we age, because as you age, falling breaks bones and stuff.
Hey, Dr. Callender, I couldn't even do 2 seconds.
Well, it all starts with after you work at it, it'll get up to 5 seconds.
Oh, gosh. It's I guess there's a process on how you work up to a plank, but
You see?
yeah.
Yeah. From 5 seconds to 10 seconds, and then 10 seconds to 20 seconds. And
Well,
then,
I got to get down from 2 seconds back to 5 seconds.
yeah, well,
The exercise that I hate is the down dog. I hate that because instead of being on a plank, you're on a V, upside down V.
Right.
And that's for me. And I know a lot of females can do that, but for me, that's real hard. The downward facing dog.
Okay, I'm back. I just tried my 60-second plank.
did you do it for 60 seconds?
Yeah.
Wow, go ahead,
You go, Darryl.
Darryl.
Yeah, go down.
Wow, 60 seconds. Wow. Tough. So you're in good shape. Well, I think it's a great exercise as you age to keep you from falling. Okay, go to the next one. Now, this is an exercise intervention that may help subacute spine pain. And back pain, as we know, is one of the commonest problems that people have, regardless of age, but especially as you age. Physical therapy works, and I think Mr. Tatum, you've been the recipient of physical therapy recently, right?
Yes, and still am.
Yeah, and what do you think about it?
It's very necessary for people to exercise, and that's all physical therapy is: exercising and doing the bike and doing different leg lifts and so forth. But for people like myself who've had back injuries, it's totally necessary for me to do that. But even if you haven't had any back injuries and you're going into your elderly years, physical therapy or related exercises are good for you. They're really good for you. And one thing I noticed though is that once you get in an exercise routine and then you stop for a few days or whatever, your body deconditions and you got to start back from where you were and then catch up. So you got to maintain that physical therapy, those exercises, you got to continue them. You can't ever stop.
Yeah. I always say that once you get over 40, exercising is mandatory.
Yes. Dr. Ivy's on board.
Dr. Callender, I once hurt myself when I was teaching, and somehow I pushed a cart with my hip and I ended up with a sciatic nerve. And so they sent me to physical therapy. And so when I retired, I kept doing those exercises they had me to do. And so when I retired, I started doing Zumba. And of course, some other things I did with my holistic, for my wellness plan for myself. But I noticed in Zuma and the other exercise that they were doing at the wellness center, I no longer have any of those problems.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. It's interesting that how therapeutic exercise can be. It's interesting how that can be effective for chronic back and neck pain as well.
So I had a question, Doc, is the spine, is that equal to the back? Is that the exact same thing, or are they?
Well, actually, the back is just part. You've got the components of the spine and cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and pelvic bones. So the spine goes from the top of the neck down to the coccyx. So that's the spine. Okay, the back is just part of the spine, and the lumbosacral area is really what the back is, and the other parts, as the brain leaves from and all the nerves leave, they go from the top of the neck down to the coccyx, which is the tailbone, and all that from the neck to the tailbone is the spine, and the bony part of it is the spine, and it protects the spinal column from which the nerves come out. But we talk a lot about the back because the lumbosacral part of the spine is the area that many of us have sciatic nerves and those kinds of back problems. And the changes in the discs and the osteoporosis often will manifest itself in the lumbosacral area of the spine. And so we talk about the back.
I think we need some graphics.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, okay, we would do. That would help too.
If you've ever had back pain, you know what he's talking about.
Yeah, of all the thing that immobilized me more than anything else in my life was back spasms. Okay, the thought of moving was painful. Not to speak of moving. Yeah, spasms. Yeah.
I'm sorry to join so late. I just couldn't get in for some reason.
Really?
Yeah, I had trouble logging in.
Wow. We covered a lot of stuff, man. Sorry.
I'm sure you did.
And we talked about you too, because you're the oldest member of the group. So we
I
mentioned.
appreciate that.
We do too.
I'm surprised you didn't talk about the football injury, or did you?
We did. We
Yeah.
did. We did. We talked about so many different things. Yeah, that was probably one of the first things we talked about. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, any questions about that I could help?
Well, we pretty seriously discussed it, except that the one issue that came up was, since there's such a high incidence of CTE and all that, the question was whether there was a waiver. And of course, Darryl pointed out that there's a plan, but not a waiver. And I'm doubtful that there will ever be a waiver, because that's part and parcel of playing football.
That's right, but it's not limited to football. You know, what happens in hockey. A guy got hit by a puck and had a cardiac arrest.
Yeah, right.
And, ice hockey is one of the roughest sports, and you could get hit by a skiing. You could run into a tree or something. Anything that hits the chest can cause that same reaction.
Yeah, but that is one of the least likely of the issues that we were discussing was concussion, because that is so much more common in the NFL.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that particular injury with the chest is, you know, and I always often thought about that because you see the guys in the NBA. They
Yeah,
hit
yeah,
each
they
other
can
in
get
the
hit
chest
too.
all the time, man. And I'm
Anybody that
wondering
has,
why they continue to do that because, you know, the heart is a sensitive organ and pounding on the chest like that is, I'm
right,
surprised they don't have any of that in the NBA.
yeah, any kind of blunt chest injury can cause it.
Yeah.
But these AEDs, did you discuss those?
No,
That's the automatic electronic resuscitation defibrillator.
right. No, we haven't discussed that, but that's a subject that every public area is supposed to have an AED. So in case anybody has a cardiac arrest, they go into they need to be defibrillated. They can, but you have to know how to use it. That's the other aspect of it. Did you want to make some comments about that, Lou?
Well, it's set so that there's a voltage regulator, so it's from 4 to 1,000 volts, depending on the size of the patient. And these things are, the people who use them are supposed to be versed in the settings for the particular weight or size of the patient. And that's the only thing that really can shock the heart out of the irregularity that's been caused by the disruption in the electrical system from the shock of the injury to the chest. And the major thing that's really involved for survival is the oxygen to the brain. And the patient has to be intubated or some kind of block put in the mouth to depress the tongue so you can get air down to the lungs. And anything over 3 minutes is disastrous in terms of the brain coming back to normalcy, because once the brain goes, then you're brain dead, and that's it. The heart might be beating, but you'll never be able to recover.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that my daughter reminded me was that in the football field, they're so well prepared for that that might be one of the nicest place to have a cardiac arrest.
Exactly.
They resuscitate you so quickly, so that probably the hospital and a football field are the places, if you're gonna have a cardiac arrest, it's a good place to have it because they have so many people who are familiar with how to do CPR
Right, and see in the hospital we have cardioversion. That's an electrical stimulation of the atrium, because here we have atrial fibrillation. But when you get ventricular fibrillation, that's a different story. And that's how come the reaction is so different. People walk around with AFib on a regular basis, but it can convert to a ventricular fibrillation. That's the concern, and also the concern of throwing clots. But ventricular fibrillation is really a very serious event.
Yeah, what's the name of the doctor who actually was the first one to use the ventricular defibrillator that is put in people so that should they have a ventricular fibrillation, it can be reversed. The doctor from Johns Hopkins, the black doctor from Johns Hopkins, what's his name? I can't think of his name.
Black doctor? Watkins?
Yeah. Levi Watkins, right.
Yeah.
He was the one who developed the ventricular defibrillator. And first it was external. Now they have an internal defibrillator for those people who actually have that disease entity. And so that they can shock the heart back into normal function. But anyway.
Yeah, well, they have the pacemakers that have that capability of providing a shock based on the rhythm of the heart. And that's what, but this fellow is a young 24-year-old, and we would expect him to have a healthy heart, so that shouldn't be a problem. But older people, you probably have to be fitted with a ventricular defibrillator.
Right. Okay, let's go back to the article. This is something that's brand new. That can well, I'm not sure if you're a parent, you want to be identified as the person from whom the cancer came. But anyway, they now have a ability to identify a gene and tell whether it came from the father or the mother. You know, the blame game is not something that we really want to be dealing with, but it also can help in terms of identifying where the gene came from, and so looking at the family to find out whether or not they're likely to have that gene for that particular cancer. This is something that didn't exist before. As we know more about genetics and as we use more information about the genetic testing, and one of the things that you have to recognize is that getting genetic testing is more than a notion, because you may or may not want to know the information about your genes. Whether you have propensity to have a disease or not is something that you may want to know, but you may only want to know that. You may not want your employer to know that. You may not want your other family members to know it either. So when you get genetic testing, keep in mind that it can be a double-edged sword, but it's good to have that information so you can look at the rest of the family and identify whether or not the likelihood of you having a particular cancer or other disease is possible.
Dr. Callender, you know, a lot of times, like when you go for doctor visits and you have to fill out these forms, they ask you certain questions, you know, about your history and your family history so that they can, I guess, better determine maybe what's going on in your body. So I guess sometimes it is best to know that background history.
Right, for medical reasons, right.
Mhm.
But my point is that just to get genetic testing without protection of that genetic information, that should be your business and your business only. When other people have it and have access to it inappropriately, it can be used against you. And so that's something to keep in mind when you get your genetic testing. It can still be a double-edged sword, and you're right. It's good to know it for family issues, but keep in mind that when it goes outside of the medical profession, it can be used against you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act that was passed in 2008, which prohibits health insurance companies and employers for discriminating based on genetic testing. So you're protected there. But if you're shopping for life insurance and you're asking the questions about pre-existing illnesses or family history, life insurance genetic testing can be used against you for life insurance. So the recommendation is to hold off on genetic testing until after you have your life insurance.
That's
Yeah.
very wise information.
Interesting.
Yeah. Janice, you had a comment?
No, I said that's interesting, you know, genetic testing and hold off until after you get your insurance. Makes sense.
So
Life insurance.
when does one do genetic testing? And
Well, you know, some people want to do it before they get married, you know, because let's say, is there sickle disease in your family? You know, that's a genetic disease. So you may, before you get married, some people may want to know whether or not you have that. But that's a different information. You can get that without getting specific genetic testing relative to cancer and other aspects. There's other diseases that are associated with cancer that are more
Right. Like the BRCA gene. My sister had cancer.
right.
And she was tested for the BRCA gene if she had it, then they suggested that we would go through it. And she did not have that gene. So.
Right. So, and if you know you have it, then of course you have to tell others theoretically, or
Dr. Callender, I was wondering about that myself because, as I've mentioned before, both my father and my son had prostate cancer. And, at a certain point, I had to ask my primary physician if I could get the PSA tests because they weren't doing it. I don't think they knew, unless I told them that my father and my son both had treatable, prostate cancer. So I
Well,
wonder if I need to ask my doctor for the genetic testing. That's different from the PSA test.
yes. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because one of the information I don't talk about a lot is that all of us are going to get prostate tumors or cancers if we live long enough. The expectation is you're going to get benign prostatic hypertrophy or prostate cancer if you live long enough. I think it's inevitable for men, and I think that's the expectation. So getting a PSA is one thing, getting the genetic testing is another. And if you want to do that, there's nothing wrong with that.
Dr. Callender, back to the medical reasons. I think that you should pick a good age to get the genetic testing because the medical field, they might be able, and I know you've talked about preventive medicine a lot, and Elizabeth talks about preventive medicine. So by knowing what your DNA has and what you're most likely to have, you could start treatment early.
Well, I think really what it does, it lets you know whether you have a likelihood of developing the disease, and therefore you look for it earlier. But it doesn't prevent it. But it does help you to be able to know whether you're at risk. And so there's certain people who, if you know you have that BRCA gene, for example, there are things that you would do to prevent you getting the cancer by doing away with the organ. And so as we learn more about genetic diseases, we will be able to know more about how to use those to prevent us from getting some cancers. If you know you're likely to get breast cancer, you have both your breasts removed. Okay, and down the line, right now we don't have all the knowledge of all of the genetic issues, and so that's where it becomes an issue. That some of the genetic information could be used against you, but I think certain diseases, like Huntington's disease, which is fatal disease. So knowledge about that may be helpful because then you know that if you have the gene, then you're going to get Huntington. But there aren't a whole lot of diseases that are quite like that. But I think that genetic information can be used for and against you in terms of paternity, maternity, and those kinds of things, as well as the disease entities.
Dr. Callender, I live very secluded. I don't know of anybody, and probably someone on this panel knows someone. You get ready to get married and you do a whole bunch of testing and saying, nah, you don't qualify, I'm not going to marry you. I don't know too many people like that. Usually when you get ready to get married and you don't ask them, we used to require blood tests and all that kind of stuff, but I don't know what culture say, I'm not going to marry you because genetically you're going to die within a year or two, or our children will inherit.
Well, it's not you're going to die. It's you're going to get a disease, sickle cell disease, for example.
Well, I'm not going to marry you because you got sickle cell and our children might have sickle cell. I don't know of anybody like that.
Well, it is now available for you to get genetic testing so that there are people who do that. And
Yeah, but they tell you to do this before you get married to help you determine whether you're gonna marry that person. I don't know, most people are not that sane to do that.
well, people in other cultures are.
Okay, and so America is different.
Some Americans are different. Some people want to know everything about this potential spouse.
But do you know anybody like that? Because I don't.
No, but I don't know a whole lot of people. So,
Okay.
but there are people who.
Is there anybody on this panel that would do that when you were younger?
Well, it gets your way out.
If you didn't want to marry him, man, no how.
Dr. Atto, you want to make a comment?
Yes, Dr. Callender. On the average, do you have an idea of how many, what is the percentage of people who submit to this genetic testing? Because this genetic testing has been going on ever since I was at Howard University as a student with respect to sickle cell. On the average, how many people do you think submit to that test before they start having children? Because I know genetic testing is virtually non-existent in my country. Before people start, they just have children anyhow. You meet following.
I think that Carol's point is well taken, is that most people in our group are not sensitive to that. So it's unusual. But in other cultures, they will do some of that. They will do some of the testing. But the question is, what are they testing for? Some people do genetic testing just to see if there's cancer in the family. They don't do it to because they don't have sickle cell disease. So sickle cell would be more in our culture. But genetic testing often is done for other reasons. The commonest, of course, is for paternity, maternity, that kind of thing, because the mother's baby, father's baby. And so those other issues like that are determined by genetics. And also, if it's a woman and you want to know about your propensity to have the BRCA gene and other genes that are associated with cancer. So I would think it's a minority, that not very many people, as Carol has suggested, but that's more of other cultures who are sensitive to that. Because genetic testing is now becoming very common in terms of looking at your ancestry. Okay. And
okay, Dr. Callender, you and your wife are both in the medical field. Did that ever run across either one of your minds when you were getting here? Okay.
I wasn't as I am now, but even then, I still wouldn't have done it because that wouldn't have crossed my mind, right?
Dr. Callender, the only example I can think of is when a couple has a baby that has
genetic disease
comes up. Yes. And then they want to find out if they had more kids.
Right.
Would occur in other kids.
That's the commonest. Of course, that is associated with all kinds of issues. Because then sometimes it turns out that it's not what we thought. And where does the blame come and all that becomes some issues then. But you're right, that's the area now that most people get genetic testing, when they find they have a child that has some kind of congenital abnormality, and they want to find out where did that gene come from, and will their other kids have it.
Okay, Carol, here's an example for you. If you read the writings of Benjamin Franklin, he talks about that America should be dedicated to Western Europeans, talking specifically about English, French, and Germans, and that he was very concerned about immigration of Eastern Europeans to the United States, saying don't mix with them. And the reason being, we're talking about Slavic people for the most part, of different genetic illnesses, diseases that they had that could be passed along to children, including Gaucher disease, cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs disease, familial dysautonomia, spinal muscular atrophy. And so, yeah, throughout time, it's been known that certain groups have more likelihood of some genetic illnesses, including birth defects. And the idea was not to pass it along to the children.
The other thing too, Dr. Callender, is we were talking about preventive medicine. Genetic testing seems to be a good thing for looking for diseases that are treatable ahead of time. You know, you mentioned early detection and so forth, but there are certain diseases like cancer you mentioned. Cancer is one of the ones that they look for, and there are probably others that are early detection would be good.
Well, as I said, be careful what you ask for, because genetics testing can be a double-edged sword.
And Dr. Callender, I was reminded of a movie, came out in I think '97, called Gattaca, where everybody
Yeah,
in this generation had to be tested for all kinds of traits, and they were, as a result of the testing, were
segregated.
And you know, only the people that had the really good quote unquote genes could be the pilots and the leaders and everything. So there is it's called eugenics, right?
Yes, which is dangerous.
You know, so I have a limited view about that, you know, very cautious view about it, you know.
That's what I'm expressing.
Exactly.
Yeah, it has its strengths, but be wary of it, because it can be a double-edged sword.
Dr.
Okay.
Callender,
Yes.
you know, from your experience, since you work at Howard University, has the number or percentage of people who submit to this genetic testing, especially with respect to breast cancer and sickle cell gene defects, has the percentage increased or
Yes.
over the years?
Yes, especially the oncologists, for example, often do the genetic testing, just as Tatum suggested, in terms of identifying the genes that predispose to cancer. And so I think that is very common. Sickle cells, yes, very common as well.
My father had advanced stage prostate cancer. And so genetic testing would say that I'm probably at risk for that too. But just knowing that, went to a plant-based diet. And so like right now, my latest PSA result, 0.8. I'm not likely to get prostate cancer anytime soon.
That's right, not until you're 99. Okay, this is something that we've danced around for a long time. Oh, somebody had a comment? Oh, okay, I thought somebody said something. But this is something that we've mentioned periodically. Is I think John Buchanan talked about how music improves the quality of life for all patients, but especially we're aware of its impact on people with dementia. And it's interesting how people older and who have dementia, when they hear music, how the quality of life can be changed dramatically. John talked about a good example of it, and all of us have probably seen examples where somebody who has dementia, who you play one of their songs that they remember, and they perk up and they're different. And so they did this project in nursing homes, and they were able to identify that after hearing the music, they were calmer, more cheerful, and more communicative. It's interesting, whether it's Bach or whether it's Louis Armstrong, it all depended on their history. And so there's potentially suitable music for each patient. And so the question is, what kind of music is your kind of music? And so I think that music is a powerful influence, and many of us here are musicians, and so it would be particularly important as we age and get into those situations to hear our music from time to time.
Yeah.
That's
I perform in some assisted living and memory care centers. One particular place, I play there about 3 or 4 times a year, and there's a lady who says, "Will you play Mac the Knife? That was my husband's favorite song." And so I play Mac the Knife, and as soon as I'm done, she says, "Will you play Mac the Knife?"
Yeah.
I know I go with one of my friends who's a minister to senior citizen places and assisted living places. And this one gentleman who is a deacon at his church, but he's now at this assisted living place. And when we start doing, the hymns and stuff like that, and we try to get them to interact with us. And this one gentleman starts talking about being in a quartet, and he'll start singing this song, Blind Barnabas. I'd never heard it before, but it's a religious song about Barnabas.
Oh yeah, Blind Barnabas. Yeah.
Yes, and he will stand up and sing all 3 verses.
Really?
Yes, it's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing the influence that music has on people, especially so-called demented people.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is they're there, but that whatever the music that was in them still comes out.
Yeah, and on the street, you see all these people dancing to music.
That's true.
Yeah, they're dancing to Busting Loose, all that stuff. It's amazing. Yeah.
One of the things about dementia that I've experienced, like especially with my mom, that long-term memory was locked in. Everything from her childhood was perfect. The memory was perfect, but the short term, this highlights what Darryl was just talking about. 3 minutes ago, gone. Okay. 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, locked in. That's one of the qualities of dementia that I've seen.
Yeah.
Dr. Callender, I have a question about, you talk about the music that's in you and it comes, you can always remember for those that have dementia. I'm trying to understand the cursing that comes out of some of the dementia patients. I've seen it in several relatives, like, what in the world? Where does this cursing come from? Where, before dementia, there was, never that kind of talk, but, now that dementia is here, it's to curse you out. What's going on with that?
Well, that's they talk about the control that your brain has over your impulses. And when that control is gone, the unsavory things that you were holding tight is lost. And so what has been pent up inside can come out.
Well, my mom had that as well, especially
my dad had that too.
Especially around 4:30 in the afternoon, sundowning, and that cursor would come out every now and then. It wasn't an everyday thing, but yeah.
That has to go with the id, the ego, and the superego.
Ego and superego.
The control factor is gone.
Yeah.
Oh.
The real Real, yeah, that says it.
One other thing about music, and we've had articles about that before, as to what music does for the person as far as breathing, physical and mental, what music does for you. Nowadays, our churches, that what drew a lot of people into singing and etc., the choirs. Now that COVID has happened, there's praise teams where it's just a small group of people coming to sing, but the large choirs or etc. somewhat in a lot of churches have disappeared. So, and I'm thinking about the health and the mental agility of people, of what music does for you. That is also a hazard to our health, mental and physical health, because of what COVID has done and a large amount of people getting together to sing at least once a week or once a month or etc.
Yep, that's so true. This article, I guess it's 10:30. It was, I guess this will be the last article.
Oh, I thought I was talking, but I was on mute. The thing I wanted to say about the music was that I've always played music with my students. And so when my family came over for the Christmas holidays, YouTube has these beautiful selections of instrumental music. And I played the one with the Christmas tree and the fireplace crackling in the background. And it was so relaxed. And they have different categories. If you're tense, for your muscles, for your, it just has a variety of relaxing music. And I want to thank you for that article that reinforced that how music is so important.
Okay, great. This is an article about something that we know well, about the common cold and the triple demic. It talks about typical cold symptoms, usually not with the fever, but can be associated with the fever. And talks about how long it lasts, and 7 to 10 days, and changes in the first 4, and emphasizes if you're sick, you should stay home. It also talks about that cold temperatures can lead to a 50% decrease in immune activity. Also that we should drink a lot of fluids, we should turn on a humidifier, get plenty of rest, all the things that we know well. This is something that is interesting. They talk about not smoking and not exerting yourself, having intense stress when you have a cold. And health experts urge people to stay at home, although health experts tend not to stay at home while they're sick, but they should. And going back to the gym when you can, and you feel good about it, and go back to school when you're fever-free. And then the triple demic, which we talked about for some time. Stay updated on vaccines, mask up on public transportation, and wash your hands often. I think all of these are things that we talk about every group, and I think it's good to remind ourselves of all of these things. We've talked about a panoply of articles today. We had one of our largest audiences again today.